Right, folks, a bit of a health warning on this tutorial because actually we're going to cover a massive amount of information here. So strap yourselves in because this is going to be sort of detail heavy. Let me remind you, first of all, that commercialization operates when elite sports, media companies and sponsors companies, external companies, when they combine with the aim of making profit for all three parties. Okay, that's what commercialization is. So with that in mind, I want to be thinking, if we take a performer or if we take a team, let's say it's a football team, a tennis team, a hockey, whatever, what is the benefit? What is the positive? What is the drawback? What is the negative? So let's do all our positives in green. Why does this benefit them? Well, first of all, they get up arrow, they get more revenue, including more income for the individual performer, right? We also have sport as a career because it's commercialized. People can go and be, let's call it, full-time athletes because there's money involved. That money can be transferred to the players. We've also got an up arrow, an increase in prize money. Now, obviously, for both the team but also the individual performer, this sort of drives that experience. We also have these people because they've been shown through the media or the team, their profile is raised even to role model status, even to fame status, perhaps. Now, I mentioned the word role model. I'm going to throw it in here. People, teams may become role models in society. And I guess that's both a blessing and a curse. Depends whether you can uphold it, I suppose. But there we go. We also get, up arrow, an increase in sponsorship opportunity. Think about how many sports performers you know that endorse things. I'll put sponsorship ops in there. So increase, that's an up arrow, believe it or not, sponsorship opportunities in there. And also, they get wider opportunities. Now, these wider opportunities for these performers, it could be for them to go and work in the media, it could be for them to sell image rights, but let's just call it generally the opportunities that come with fame, with people knowing who you are. Now, of course, there are negatives. So here's one of the negatives. This is not a level playing field. In fact, this is exclusive. And what we mean by this, it's based on the popularity of the sport and the level that's being played. Remember, it only relates to elite sport. So it's the popularity of sport. So this works beautifully in football. If you're a javelin thrower, it might not be as effective for you, for example. Also, one of the negatives is ongoing media exposure. Now some people will enjoy that. Some people will loathe it, and obviously when something goes wrong, that can be highlighted. And I'll mention that now. If I call it bad behavior, let's say someone's big night out or some relationship-based behavior, bad behavior publicized. So people are in the spotlight. It's kind of like doing a deal with the devil, right? If you do things well, it's positive, but if you do things badly, they're going to get picked up for that too. Therefore, we can argue that media is a form of intrusion. And of course, if we add social media into that, that is a continuous intrusion, you could argue. As a result, you become almost, not that I've ever experienced it, you become, air quotes, not normal. You can't go and do the shopping. You can't walk down the road. Everything is analysed. So every performance, imagine being a modern day footballer at the top level. Every single thing you do is analysed. You may receive insults. I mentioned social media already. You might also have, I haven't got space here, you might also have excessive demand to compete. Imagine if you need a rest, you're tired, your body's exhausted, and you can't necessarily do that. That can be negative from one's health. And the other one here is that when someone does do something negative, for example, their sponsorship can be removed. So it might not be a reliable source of income. Now, we also want to think about this relationship not just for the performer or the team, but let's also have a think about it. What about the sponsor? What about the business? Why does Gillette sponsor midweek football, for example? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? So the positives, you get up arrow, increased visibility of the product, even becoming like a household name and brand awareness and all that stuff. You're linked to health. So, McDonald's, for example, have made a very strong association with sport, including the Olympic Games, and of course they get linked to health. This leads to an increase in sales, those factors that I've just talked about. This also leads to an up arrow, an increase in what I mentioned already, brand awareness. Okay, so that seems fairly clear. Household name, I'll put that in again. We might even get a positive perception of the brand. Okay, so it's not just that you know a brand exists, Gillette for razors or whatever. You know that it's like, oh, it's the best, they sponsor at this level, they're linked to health. You know, you might not think those things specifically, but they're kind of subliminal, aren't they? They're sort of indoctrinated into you. However, when you sponsor a team or a performer, that personal team success is not guaranteed. So what happens if you're a business and you throw a load of money into sponsoring a cricket team and they constantly lose? That's obviously a bit of an issue. You could end up being, as the sponsor, you could be linked to deviant behaviours. A good example of this would be the Lance Armstrong case, for example, where he was doping. Lots of companies were sponsoring him, let's say Trek bicycles, for example, and as a result of that, that is then tarnished in its reputation. Thirdly, it can be very expensive, especially at the top level to sponsor. And fourthly, it needs to be continuous. Advertising once is not what this is about. Notice that your big corporations that I've mentioned, McDonald's again, will advertise ongoing. And of course, that's a big cost. What about to an event or a sport? We're getting there, folks. What about to an event? Let's say the FA Cup. What about to a sport? Let's say football or tennis. What are the positives and negatives in this scenario? So, first of all, increased income from those media companies. The media companies bid for the rights to show those things. Therefore, we get greater investment by those sports. Those sports can then go and invest that money in whatever facilities, grassroots, whatever. We also, these events get a global audience. Think about, Wimbledon Tennis Week, it's shown all over the world. Therefore, these sports can move into international markets. Okay, so think about Premier League or WSL football selling merchandise into Asia or Africa, for example. So international ops, I'm going to put it for those sports. Furthermore, we also get greater viewing figures, so we get up arrow viewing, so more people actually watching because it's kind of internationalized and globalized, etc. We therefore get more international investment. As a result of that, there's an increase in grassroots participation. Is it a surprise to you that because there's so much elite football, men's and women's on the TV, that more boys and girls from around the world are taking part in football? No, it's predictable, isn't it? And finally, we can also argue that sport modernizes because it has to be sort of TV friendly. There's loads of examples of this. Let's say cricket moving into the 120-20 formats to make it more modern, to make it more viewable, I suppose. Okay, but this is the interesting negatives. Sport is now secondary. And what I mean by that is that sport is now not just about the enjoyment of movement and competing. No, it's actually secondary to commercial activity. Furthermore, we get a lot of change in times. You know, your 3 o'clock match is now on at 12 o'clock because it needs to be shown in Asia or whatever it happens to be. So changing kickoff times. We could argue there is a loss of tradition. The old way of playing the sport is lost or marginalized. We can also say that the sponsors, they apply pressure to the sports to get what they want. We might say that rule changes lose kind of the essence of the sport. Also, minority sports don't get a looking. You know, think about, wheelchair basketball, for example. It doesn't get this kind of benefit. So Paralympic sports, minority sports, etc. Also, we get things like scandals are public. So if something goes wrong, if there's a financial issue, for example, if someone cheats, that becomes very, very public. We've also got the issue of gender. You know, notice that men's sport is often treated in this way, but far less commonly women's. And we can argue, especially with gender as well, you get the reinforcement of stereotypes. You know, things like this over here. Sport is for men. Men are better at sports. Men's sport's more important. All these stereotypes get kind of perpetuated. Now, I just want to finish this off, folks, by looking at spectators. And I realise this is quite a long video and you're sort of sticking in there with me, and I appreciate it. And I said at the start, there's a lot of information here. I completely accept that. But we're going to talk about spectators here. And I want to initially identify what we refer to as primary spectators. Primary spectators are what we are talking about, people in the actual crowd at the event. So first of all, because of that, we actually have, I don't know why I put the arrow there, we actually have better stadia, stadia being the plural of stadium, obviously. So the stadia has better involvement. Because athletes are full-time, because it's full-time athletes, this leads to better standards. So basically, you get a better standard of play because the athletes themselves are better. You get new versions, more exciting versions. So think about, again, the 100, the T20 cricket sort of example I mentioned before. That's really positive. But there are, of course, negatives in here. We have a loss of tradition. People lose what they liked before, so the sport feels different. It's not got its traditional kind of identity in the stadium. We've also got disruption. Think about the need to have advertising. Think about the change in the structure that can disrupt the spectator's experience. We get ticket prices going up, increase in ticket prices, because of course now this is much more of a premium product, I suppose. We get a loss of local identity. You know, and I think there's nothing better as an example of this one than men's football, because men's football, which used to be based on, especially on geography and local areas, and in this case, men playing for their local towns, that's obviously much more globalized and internationalized. A fan is no longer a fan; they are now a consumer, someone who is to be sold to. That's a change of experience, and there we go. Now, I just want to introduce as well the idea of a secondary spectator. Now, the secondary spectator are those spectators that are watching through the TV at home, or generally the TV. Now, I'll use a different green for these, but of course, these folks also have positives and negatives. We get more matches for our secondary, so there's more competition, more TV coverage. Fantastic. We could even say every day for these people. So, you know, that's great. You can. I was watching football last night and the night before, for example. That leads to more choice. Okay, so you get more of like a consumer experience, I suppose, in that sense. You also get access to international versions of your sport. I watch South American football, for example. I watch the Chinese Table Tennis League. This is just my personal experience. And you also get this idea that kind of you've got access to things like stories and narratives and narratives, things that are not just the match, not just the competition, but you can watch TV, documentaries, and all kinds of different things. But again, there are negatives, and the main negative I'm going to put over here is subscription price. So obviously, lots of TV is behind a paywall, and one has to pay for that, and that can be, of course, negative. Lots of information. Appreciate your time.